So let's talk about the upcoming Codex for the Thousand Sons, the few clues that Games Workshop have told us so far, and then rounding up a series of text leaks that might give us a little bit of foresight into the future. Hello and welcome back to Warspec Tactics, where today we're talking Thousand Sons, and in this video I thought we'd do a roundup of the Thousand Sons things that we know so far, and also a few potential interesting text leaks that have been going around that claim to know a good few things as to the mechanics of the new Codex. This is all coming with the release of Codex Thousand Sons. Pre-orders are going live on Saturday the 17th of May, so full release in stores on the 31st of May. They're the go times for the book, and as well as that there's also the new Combat Patrol box set and the Warpflame Thrall bands. It's likely to create a good few shake-ups for the Codex with new detachments, plus the new unit being added in with the Sekhetar Robots, and Games Workshop's likely to be dropping a bunch of rules previews over the course of the week. I was wondering if they might do some on Monday, but it seems that revealing a new Chaos Knight was enough excitement for 40k fans from their point of view. As ever, if you're looking to pick up the Codex or any of the new Battle Force box sets, feel free to check out the discount retailers linked down in the video description. They can save a fair bit of money versus Games Workshop around the world, and they do help to support Warspec Tactics with any purchases through those links. Here are the go times for the Battle Forces between Friday nights to Saturday morning. Hopefully Games Workshop will have made enough of them this time around. I'm genuinely not too sure whether these ones are going to sell out quickly or not, but given how quickly the Death Guard ones vanish, it might well be worth being early if you have the opportunity to. Thousand Sons did get some pretty fun index rules in 10th edition 40k, I thought. Their Psychers generating a whole bunch of Cabal points, and then you can spend them on powerful rituals with a vast amount of magic hitting the enemy, doom bolts for a bunch of mortal wounds, double moving your units and all sorts of other shenanigans. It was quite nice they retained the spirit of psychic powers in the face of most other factions losing that sort of thing in 40k in general. Their fortunes have been a bit up and down as the edition's gone on. For a time they were one of the strongest armies in the game, though then Games Workshop increased a bunch of points costs for them. So now Thousand Sons armies tend to be a bit on the elite and expensive side of things. They're not doing awfully in tournaments, though maybe a bit towards the lower end of the 40k meta. Win rates are around about 46 to 47% or so, and quite low play rates, not too many people choosing to put them on the table at the moment. When they're put on the board, it's with their index detachment, which is rated far better than their Grotzmas one, and they maybe are one of the 40k armies that's a bit mono build in the way that they tend to play, partly due to the Thousand Sons having a pretty small model range. But for competitive lists, they basically always start with Magnus, then a bunch of small Warpflamer Rubik Marines with sorcerers to lead them, perhaps a Mutalith or two for support, and then a bunch of small chaff units to do some screening and scoring type things. As mentioned, it's not like they have many model choices, but Magnus being basically every single list, and Scarab Cult Terminators not really seeing play, don't really help too much with varied builds for the faction. Fingers crossed the Codex will be able to shake things up for the better. So far, Games Workshop have only given us a few small teasers as to Codex Thousand Sons. From a combination of their Sunday preview and a few other things, they've basically announced it's an 120-page rulebook. They did confirm the names of the demon datasheets being added in, so Flamers, Screamers, Pink and Blue Horrors, the Lord of Change and Kairos Fate Weaver. That'd fit pretty well with the Death Guard and Emperor's Children. And then they're going to have 5 detachments in the book. The index style one for Balanced Magic, a Mutant Cultist focused one with Hordes of Zangors, one with some Implacable Rubricae, a mixed host of demons, which I guess will be the demons allied one, and then a vehicle focused one. They also gave us the hint for the number of datasheets there might be. There's 39 reference cards in their datasheet card pack, and if you take off the 1 for their primary army rule and then 4 for their combat patrol datasheets, that would leave 34 left. And if you take off those 6 demon datasheets, that'd be 28,000 Sons left. So I guess something would have to make way for the Sekhetars. Probably the biggest and most likeliest would be the Cultists, unfortunately, as they went away for the Death Guard, and they feel like they're in a kind of equivalent spot for the Thousand Sons. There might be another loss of some sort if these leaks are right about the Zangor Enlightened datasheet getting split in two. I kind of wonder if they might lose the distinction between the Exalted Sorcerer and the regular Sorcerer on foot, or maybe the Terminator Sorcerer potentially, given that the Death Guard lost theirs. Again, I'd kind of hope not for unit diversity. I guess we'll wait and see on that front. Otherwise, they did talk a little bit about the Sekhetar Robots as well. The lore behind them is their mechanical constructs, something between ancient automata, presumably from the Legion's past, and I guess essentially demon engines infused with tutellaries. There was some previous lore about them functioning better in regions of low warp activity, such as the Pariah Nexus. They're used by the Legions both as bodyguards and guardians for ancient sites and other places once the rest of the Thousand Sons have departed, and they're protected by wards and runes to misdirect and cause illusions, and are capable of a limited degree of foresight as well to counter incoming harm for their sorcerers who they bodyguard. Their models have maybe gone down to a slightly muted reception though, maybe just looking a bit on the static side of things and feeling quite different and other to the rest of the Legion, particularly with that paint scheme. They did give us a few rules teasers for them from the Warhammer preview show. It seems to have got access to a heavy warp flamer. I'd guess maybe the big two-barreled thing, given that it's got a tube leading to something on their back, and then backed up either by a claw or a melter weapon of some kind. On their backs they have racks of Hellfire missiles, kind of similar to the Scarab Occult Terminators. I guess with all three ranged weapons they'll have quite a shooty profile, there may be one that's quite good against different targets as opposed to being particularly focused. They get a free Overwatch stratagem, which I guess would be nice enough with the heavy flamer style profiles, some sort of special rule for helping bodyguard the sorcerers that they go with, and they also have the vehicle keyword, which will be relevant for one of the Thousand Sons detachments. That's the majority of what Games Workshop have revealed or teased so far though. And now let's move on to talk about the potential leaks and rumours, which if they do turn out to be accurate could have some big changes for the Legion. Before we jump into that though, I'll just give a quick shout out to the sponsor of today's video in Weyland Yutani terrain. They're one option to get a board worth of 40k terrain on the table, and the market that they aim at is the more sort of competitive end of the spectrum, with the focus being a bit more on function over form. They supply the WTC, one of the biggest and best known 40k team tournaments in the world. Their terrain pieces are made of fairly lightweight, sturdy plastic, with the option for them to be printed in a fair few different designs. There's some overgrown ruins, Arctic laboratories and medieval castles here, and they're fairly easy to take apart and take down and store flat if needed. For a few examples of their offerings, they've got this WTC Warmaster GT pack, which I think is quite a good one for a balanced 40k table, 4 big ruins, 6 medium ones, and 4 armoured container crate type things, plus some bases for them as an extra. As well as that, they've also got an option for a Pariah Nexus terrain pack, the current competitive layout for that for the WTC, with a whole bunch of big ruins and some sort of girder forest type things. And they do have some sets of 4 3-story ruins as well, if you just want a smaller and cheaper option to add a bit of line of sight blocking terrain to a table. In any case, you can find them linked in the video description. There's a code ALLSPECS5 for 5% off if you do happen to pick anything up, so be sure to use that if you do check them out. Let's leave Games Workshop's previews behind and get into the more risky territory of leaks though. We basically had some early Codex leaks both for the World Eaters and for the Death Guard, shared as text leaks around about a week and a bit prior to the Codexes coming out, and it does appear that a similar sort of one has been going around for the Thousand Sons that have been kind of slow to get to. I'd seen it talked about already. I think Tactical Tortoise did a video a few days back. It was around on some faction discords before that though, and I have seen a few different versions of the list. As ever, I'd take these with salt given that it is a text leak, so it's really quite easy to make up if you want to, but so far for the text leaks that have looked plausible enough to actually talk about on the channel, they've had some pretty good form lately. So far in 2025 we had a bunch of ones for Fulgrim and the Emperor's Children which turned out to be right, then some ones that looked kind of dodgy to me for the last balanced data slate, but again they turned out to be more or less true. Then both the World Eaters and Death Guard ones all turned out to be exactly on the money as well. So at least to my mind, there's some pretty good odds that these will turn out to be accurate. I guess we'll know one way or the other pretty quickly with Games Workshop previews, and I guess we'll see whether they start to corroborate them or just completely different. Obviously, it doesn't necessarily mean that this one's any more likely to be right just because ones in the past have been, but at least at first glance, nothing really seems particularly implausible. Overall, I just wouldn't get hung up on it too much either way. Treat as some interesting teasers and rumours at the moment. I did find them interesting enough to talk through at least. Getting into it though, and one thing that was mentioned was a possible army rule for the Thousand Sons. It sounds like while some factions have had just some minor tweaks to their main army rule, the Thousand Sons get a few at least fairly major ones. If this is right, then it sounds like the Kabbalistic rituals are now being a bit more akin to old school psychic powers to cast them. Apparently 4 different options that you can cast: Doombolt, a double move one, rerolls against a unit, and an AP debuff. And then apparently the way it works is that any psychic can cast them. You roll a 2d6 to cast, or might have the ability to go to a big 3d6 if you have the chance of taking some mortal wounds. Apparently there'll then be a higher and lower casting value, and if you get to the higher one then the effect is greater, such as Doombolt getting to the d3 plus 3 mortal wounds if you cast on the higher one versus d3 if you don't, and then reroll ones versus full rerolls to damage somehow. I'm not sure if it hits wounds or both, then boosting AP either by 1 or by 2, and I guess some sort of limitation as to how far you can move otherwise. Apparently you're able to keep on trying to cast these with different psychers until you've succeeded at least once, and then following that you can't use the same ritual for the rest of the battle round. If that does turn out to be right, that seems like at least a fairly good system on paper, though a big shake-up if so. Certainly depends a bit on how easy those things are to cast. That could add a whole load of uncertainty as to how your turn might go if say one psyker fails to cast the right spell and then you have to do it with something else. But I guess if you just can keep on plugging away with them and not have to purely build around getting Cabal points, then it could mean that other versions of Thousand Sons lists might be a bit easier to play. Overall, if that did turn out to be right, I do quite like the feel of it, if anything leaning a bit more towards the feel of 9th edition psychic powers. Otherwise, for some teasers for characters, Magnus was reported as +2 to cast, nerfed but cheaper. Apparently he's able to do 2 rituals but gets damage to sweep attacks. Kind of not really too much without seeing the rest of the profile there. For the most part those all sound like positives, so I wonder whether or not his +1 to hit and wound psychic powers aura is still a thing. Araman apparently gets a +1 to those cast rolls and is able to redeploy 3 units. And for a few other teasers for characters, the Winged Prince might have a way to get a 6-inch deep strike, which would be a big deal if so. The Demon Prince on foot gets lone operative if near friendlies, and that sounds like a safe bet compared with the other on foot princes for the Deity Legion codexes. Keeps his primary special rule with the Glamour of Tzeentch, but gets some sort of casting buff as his other one. And regular sorcerers on foot can add +D3 to attacks and strength once per game. For other units, if these wind up being right, cultists might well be gone completely. Again, like with the Death Guard, that would be a shame. Though given it happened to Death Guard, it seemed at least a good possibility it might happen for the Thousand Suns. I was wondering whether or not they might be able to escape, given that some of them appear in the Space Marine 2 game. It would seem a little bit of a questionable choice to retcon units in that big hit quite so soon. I guess as a result it will place a lot more emphasis on the Zangor units if they did go away though, given that they'd be your choices for chaff things. Otherwise, for the supposed unit leaks, it's recorded that Rubik Marines get AP2 bolters and their movement boosted to 6 inches, and the Icon of Flame shifted to grant ignores cover for them. I guess if that's right, that'd give them some punchy bolter fire and they'd catch up significantly compared with the Warp Flamers. And I guess the Warp Flamers wouldn't care about the ignores cover as they get that anyway. It would be quite good if they managed to make both of the choices an actual choice again, as opposed to Warp Flamers just being the really obvious one. Zangor sound like they potentially get a couple of good buffs with a Scout 6 inches and a return to reserves if not within 9 inches of the enemy. I guess the Scout 6 inches will be taking on the role that the cultists have or had. The return to reserve seems a little bit unusual though. Usually it's only banned if you're very close to the enemy, so having to be 9 inches away would be quite a big deal. Still being able to basically return to reserves and then come in via strategic reserve would be still very good though. The leak claims that the Zangor Enlightened are reportedly split into 2 datasheets by wargear choice, one with the Divining Spears getting mortal wound impact hits on the charge, and one with the Great Bows getting a reactive move of some kind. In general they tend to get more taken for the units themselves than their wargear massively. Might be interesting enough if they have some good use in the Zangor formation though. Hellfire missiles gain the Blast keyword, both for the Sekhetar Robots and for the Scarab Occult Terminators, and Rhinos now give a damage buff of some kind to their disembarking passengers. Quite a lot of transports wind up giving reroll wound rolls to their passengers alongside, though if I guess that was also their buff, then the Rubik Marines would have to have a different datasheet rule, given that they have reroll wound rolls against objective markers already, and that'd be a bit of anti-synergy there if that was the case. Overall mainly seems broadly interesting enough, though of course will be sad news about the cultists if they weren't a thing anymore in the book. For the new Sekhetar robots, the leaks claim that they're going to be in squads of 2 to 4 reportedly with the vehicle keyword. I saw one of the versions of the document claim 80 points per 2. We already basically know their war gear from the Warhammer community previews, the Claw versus Melter Gun and the Heavy Warp Flamer, though apparently their native ballistic skill and weapon skill is a 4+. For their special rules, perhaps the most surprising one is that it's claiming that these are able to infiltrate. That's certainly something that I wouldn't have guessed and would be a big shake-up to their battlefield role compared with what I thought they'd be. I was more thinking there'd be a slightly slow and solid big damage and defense unit for the Thousand Suns if they've got a fair points cost for being infiltrators though. And that probably means that they'll have to be not very mighty, otherwise they're just going to be a bit unbalanced. I think it will be a bit of a weird feeling having the slow and stomping moving robots being the infiltrators of the army, but at the same time it still wouldn't massively surprise me if they went that way, maybe going with the idea of them taking up forward positions with their foresight or something. It does seem that Games Workshop seem to be giving infiltrates to every army that they can in some way, shape or form, and maybe these will wind up being that for the Thousand Suns. Also, apparently as well as free Overwatch, there's a chance they may have free Heroic Intervention as well. And the leaks also claim that they had a -1 to hit as well, which I'd guess with their bodyguard ability might be if they're led by a character. That'd feel pretty appropriate. It's quite common to have some sort of durability debuff if a character's leading a bodyguard style unit. I believe Inner Circle Companions get similar. Overall definitely looks like an interesting unit, and even more so if they can infiltrate. Will be fun to see the full datasheet if and when Games Workshop unveil it, and put all the pieces together for what these stompy statue boys can do in game. Finally, they've got a detachment list, and maybe just one small thing that might point to the credibility of these is that all the detachments seem to be in line with the ones that they mentioned in the Codex preview at the weekend, despite the leaks having been published before that. Seems they haven't really given too many in-depth details as to the detachments themselves, but the index style one is said to be broadly similar, though the waves of bonus spell damage is just once each, once per game. So I guess 1 turn of sustained hits, 1 turn of lethals, and 1 turn of devastating wounds. That will be a nerf to the Index Detachment, and maybe Magnus in particular, as a result. For all we know, they've changed all the stratagems in a big way though, so a bit early to say anything about power at the moment. For the Tzaangor Detachment, Tzaangors apparently gain battle line and an extra pip of OC, and I'm guessing that the core detachment rule is this one, the option to take D3 mortal wounds to either reroll saves of 1 or wound rolls of 1, which I must admit for the Tzaangor units doesn't really sound like a great trade-off at all. Feels like you might be costing yourself more damage than you actually gain if that does turn out to be 100% accurate with no other context. Apparently one of them is a stratagem to gain a 4+ invulnerable save too. Then they list a rubric-focused attachment, and apparently this one sees the return of All Is Dust in some way, giving you a durability buff against damage 1 weapons, and a stratagem to reduce damage by 1 as well. So I guess some extra tanky rubrics there. For the vehicle detachment, apparently they might get some inbuilt rerolls, reroll a dice of 1 once per phase, and within 6 inches of a psyker that goes to any dice that you can reroll instead, so I guess some advantage to keeping the sorcerers nearby if that's right. Apparently an enhancement to make a sorcerer a sort of tech marine / warpsmith style model. I guess that means lone operative near vehicles and maybe putting vehicles back together again. They have had similar sort of ones for the Eldari and the World Eaters vehicle focused attachments, and stratagems for a sticky objective with some mortal wounds thrown out. Finally for the allied demon one, they merely say that demons can cast army spells, so I guess pink horrors and lords of change and things like that, with a chance to throw out doom bolts or double moves and things. Overall looks interesting enough, and probably more or less what you'd expect, one balanced style detachment, and then a whole bunch of ones that mainly focus on one given unit class. I guess given just how thematic and central the Rubric Marines are, then the rubric focused one could also be a really big deal. I think it'd probably please a fair few people if that one was an interesting one. Probably not worth thinking too much about these at the moment though, given that they could be made up. Potentially an interesting teaser of things to come though, and I guess we'll find out one way or the other fairly shortly. In any case, let me know your thoughts on the potential leaks down in the comments below. I look forward to hearing all your takes on them and whether you think the changes will be good or bad if they happened to come about. I'll certainly look forward to covering any other leaks and rumours for the Thousand Sons this week, and hopefully the full Codex review once it becomes available. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see any of that. A big thank you to Weyland Yutani Terrain for sponsoring the video as mentioned. Feel free to check them out, links down in the video description, and if you do choose to pick up any of their tournament terrain, use the code AUSPEX5 for 5% off any order. I'll leave that one there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you'd like to support the channel, there's the affiliate discount links as well, if you're looking to pick up some Thousand Sons in the near future, or the channel's Patreon page linked below as well, if you just want to show some support to the channel, and have a few other benefits such as seeing occasional videos early and entry into the regular prize giveaways. In any case though, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.